The rain had not stopped for days. Thunder rumbled low over the African plains, and the sky hung heavy with dark clouds like a great, bruised canopy stretched over the savanna. The river, swollen from weeks of relentless downpour, churned brown and angry across the flatlands, swallowing its banks with greedy force. The animals knew the dangers. Even the great prides of lions, bold rulers of this land, waited cautiously at the river's edge. Muscles tense and eyes watchful. The pride's matriarch, a lioness named Sana, paced near a bend in the muddy waters, her golden fur streaked with dampness. By her side had been her cub, Tala, curious, wild-eyed, and only half-grown. Tala had never seen a flood before. The river to him had always been something quiet, where antelope came to drink, where birds sang in the reeds. Until now, the rain had come fast, and the waters had risen faster. The pride, caught in the open plains between territories, had no choice but to cross the river. One by one, they plunged into the current, powerful swimmers fighting the pull of the torrent. But the flood was no ordinary challenge. It came like a wall, with a roar like a collapsing mountain. The flash flood surged downstream, too sudden, too violent. Tala, trailing behind the others, had barely stepped into the water when it hit. He was swept away in seconds. The world became chaos. Tala's legs flailed, trying to find the ground. But there was none. Mud and twigs scraped his belly. He gasped, and water flooded his nose. His small body spun, tumbled, dragged under, then up again. His ears rang, his vision blurred with spray. Above the water, he caught fleeting glimpses, his mother's silhouette on the far bank, her head thrown back in a roar, a flash of lion's mane, then nothing. He called out, but no sound came. The river didn't care. It spun him like a dry leaf in the wind, carried him past broken branches, debris, the carcass of a warthog tangled in reeds. He tried to paddle, to cling to anything, but his paws slipped on mud-slick logs and his claws found only water. His strength ebbed fast. When the current finally slowed, Tala was no more than a sodden bundle of fur, limp and half-conscious, drifting toward a still, eddying pool formed by the river's overflow. He washed up against a low sandbar, eyes barely open, chest heaving in shallow, uneven breaths. He didn't know he had crossed into death's domain. The pool was silent, too silent. No birds, no frogs, no splash of fish. The only sound was the soft ripple of water, disturbed by the slow approach of something massive. Tala's ear twitched weakly. From beneath the muddy surface, a shape rose, impossibly large, gliding with the grace of a ghost. A pair of slitted eyes emerged first. Then a jagged ridge of armored scales, slick with algae and flecked with mud. The crocodile was ancient, scarred, a monster from the deeper parts of the river who had ruled this stretch of land for decades. The locals, had they seen him, would have called him Ngulu, the shadow beneath. He was the kind of predator whose presence alone quieted entire sections of the floodplain. And now, he had found Tala. The young lion barely stirred as the crocodile closed the distance. There was no warning, just the rush of water, the snap of movement, then teeth. The crocodile surged forward with shocking speed and clamped his jaws around the cub's body, not in a crushing death roll. Not with the swift violence he used on wildebeest or impala. But gently, almost cautiously. Tala froze, senses suddenly blazing with fear and pain. His body screamed to move, to fight, to bite, but he could barely breathe. The crocodile's massive jaws held him just tight enough to trap, not to kill. His teeth pressed into Tala's ribs but did not break them. The lion cub hung limply from the predator's maw, his heart hammering, eyes wide with terror. Time slowed. The crocodile paused, half submerged in the shallows. The cub caught between his jaws, head dangling above the water, legs limp. Only Tala's eyes moved, darting, panicked, as raindrops fell in soft rings around them. But still, the killing blow never came. The crocodile blinked once. Then, without ceremony, he turned and began to move, slowly, deliberately, carrying the lion cub away from the river's edge, deeper into the marshy reeds beyond the flood's reach. Tala did not understand. Why hadn't he been killed? Why was he still alive? The jaws around him remained firm but restrained. He couldn't escape, and yet, he wasn't bleeding. Not yet. The crocodile brought him to a shallow, muddy rise surrounded by cattails and thornbush. There, he opened his jaws slowly and released the cub. Tala collapsed into the wet grass, shivering and silent. The crocodile remained nearby, half in the water, half on land, watching. It made no further move, no lunge, no tail swipe, just stared, unmoving, a silent statue of scale and muscle. Tala lifted his head, dazed and drenched. His ribs ached where the jaws had pressed. But nothing was broken. He stared back at the creature, his captor, his unlikely savior. Something in the crocodile's eyes was different. Not pity. Crocodiles do not pity, but not hunger either. More like recognition, as though, in the brief collision of predator and prey, something had shifted. Tala lay back down, too weak to run, too weak to fight, and the crocodile, without a sound, turned slowly and sank back into the water, vanishing into the reeds. As if he had never been there at all. Night fell. Tala lay curled in the mud, ribs rising and falling. The sounds of the plains returned slowly, crickets, frogs, the croak of storks overhead. Somewhere far off, a lion roared. Not his mother, a stranger. He was alone, but alive. Around him, the world breathed again, and beneath the surface of the pool, in the quiet dark, the crocodile waited, watching. Not as a hunter, but as something else, something unknown. In the flood's wake, a new story had begun, written not in claws or hunger, but in that fragile space between mercy and instinct, where even the wildest might hesitate, where death had paused, and a lion cub had been spared. The air still smelled of floodwater and wet grass. Morning sun pierced through scattered clouds, throwing golden light across the waterlogged plains of the wildlife reserve. Mud squelched underfoot, and birds called out tentatively as if testing whether the world was calm again. Daniel Mwangi stood at the crest of a muddy rise, scanning the valley through his binoculars. A senior ranger at Mbali Wildlife Reserve. He had spent the past 3 days checking animal migration routes, clearing fallen trees, and recording flood damage to the protected areas. He had expected to find wreckage. He had not expected what lay before him now. Down in the reeds, half submerged in a pool formed by the swollen river, he saw the massive crocodile. Ngulu. Daniel knew him, older than most of the park's dominant males. Scarred from countless fights, and often solitary, Ngulu had been tagged years ago with a small tracking chip during a tranquilizer operation. The team never managed to collar him, too big, too volatile, but he had been studied from afar. Rangers knew his patterns, his reputation. Ngulu was a killer, efficient, merciless. Entire documentaries had used clips of him lunging from the riverbank, taking down impala in seconds. But this, what Daniel was seeing now, was something else entirely. At first, he'd only noticed the ripple in the water, the slow movement of Ngulu gliding through the reeds. Then came the unmistakable sight: a lion cub, barely old enough to be weaned, dangling from the croc's jaws. Daniel's first instinct was horror. He reached automatically for the rifle slung across his shoulder and raised it. Flicking the safety off, his heart pounded. A warning shot, perhaps, scare the croc off, save what little might be left of the cub. But then he paused. The crocodile wasn't killing the cub. It wasn't even shaking it. It was holding it. Daniel lowered the binoculars, blinked, then looked again. The cub's body wasn't limp with death. It was breathing, shallow, yes, but alive. Its head was hanging down, ears twitching faintly, eyes wide and dazed, but not lifeless. And Ngulu, this monster of mud and power, was simply standing still. The cub resting gently between his jaws, half submerged in the shallows. Daniel's hands went cold. What am I seeing? Against every voice in his head telling him to stay back. Daniel moved. He strapped the rifle across his back and began descending the bank. Boots sliding in the wet clay. The air was thick with the smell of silt and flood debris. He glanced down once at his GPS radio. It had lost signal hours ago. He was alone, but the moment was too strange, too rare, too vital. Ngulu shifted slightly as Daniel stepped into the water. One slow blink from his ancient eyes. But he didn't submerge. He didn't tighten his grip on the cub. He simply watched. Daniel took another step. The water was up to his calves now. Then his knees. "Hey there, big guy," Daniel said, his voice soft, deliberate. "It's just me." The crocodile didn't move. Daniel remembered the incident 5 years ago when Ngulu had been tranquilized by his team. There had been complications. The drug dose was wrong. It had taken hours for the sedation to kick in. And Ngulu had fought violently, scarring one of the trucks and nearly killing a ranger. But somehow, when Daniel had approached him alone later, speaking calmly, kneeling just out of reach, the croc had responded. His breathing slowed, his head tilted. Some trace of understanding passed between them. Rangers never called Ngulu tame, but they'd seen how he lingered when Daniel was near. Now, Daniel walked slowly, chest deep in the water. "I see you've got someone there," he said gently. "A cub, a little one." Ngulu shifted again, a slight flex of his tail. The cub, still breathing, gave a faint whimper. Daniel stopped a few feet away. "Easy," he said. "I'm not here to take him. I just want to help." His pulse thundered in his ears. One wrong movement, and Ngulu could lunge, or vanish with the cub into the deeper pool. Daniel knew what crocodile jaws could do. He knew how fast they moved when they chose to. But Ngulu didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, angling the cub away from the water's surface. The motion was careful, purposeful. "I think you know," Daniel whispered. "You know this little one isn't your food. You're protecting him." Something flickered in Ngulu's eyes, too brief to name, too deep to understand. Daniel held his breath, then took one final step. He was now just within reach. He extended his hands slowly, palms up. "Let me take him." The crocodile stared at him for a long moment. Then something extraordinary happened. With a strange, slow grace, Ngulu opened his jaws. The cub slipped gently out, falling into the water with a soft splash, and immediately tried to crawl, weakly, toward Daniel. Daniel surged forward and caught him. Tala whimpered once and collapsed against the ranger's chest. Daniel didn't have time to react. His arms instinctively cradled the cub, holding him above the water, while his eyes never left the crocodile. Ngulu didn't move. He simply watched for another few seconds. Then, with the same calm, ancient stillness, he turned, his tail brushing the muddy water, and slid silently into the deeper part of the pool, vanishing beneath the surface like a vanishing dream. Daniel stood in the shallows, holding the soaked, trembling cub against his chest, unable to speak. The only sound now was the wind rustling the reeds. Later, wrapped in a dry tarp inside a ranger vehicle, Tala lay curled on a bed of towels, eyes closed, fur still damp but body safe. Daniel had started the engine only after scanning the waterline again and again. Ngulu was gone, the water was still, but the image wouldn't leave Daniel's mind. A crocodile who spared a lion, who held him gently, who released him. He didn't know if it was instinct, memory, or something stranger, something beyond what science could chart. But he knew what he'd seen. Life choosing not to take life. The eyes of a killer, seeing something else. And in those eyes, just for a moment, Daniel had seen something wild, and ancient, and tender, something very much alive. Tala's body was trembling as Daniel lifted him from the muddy shallows, arms wrapping instinctively around the cub's thin, wet frame. The lion cub barely reacted. No growl, no bite, no struggle, just a small, pitiful whimper as he tucked his face against Daniel's chest, as if to hide from the world. Daniel could feel the cub's heartbeat, rapid and shallow, fluttering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He was freezing, soaked through. Bones poking beneath matted fur. His paws dangled limp, and his breathing came in faint, wheezing bursts. "You're all right now," Daniel whispered, voice hoarse. "You made it. We'll get you home." He shrugged off his rain jacket and wrapped it tightly around the cub, careful to keep his head supported. It swallowed the little lion whole. But the warmth helped. The trembling slowed. Cradling Tala close, Daniel sloshed back through the floodwaters toward the narrow ridge where he'd left his ATV hours earlier. Mud clung to his boots. Reeds scraped his legs. And every step was a battle against exhaustion, but he kept moving. One foot in front of the other. Once at the vehicle, he gently laid Tala across the padded seat and reached for the emergency radio clipped to his vest. "This is Ranger Daniel," he said into the mic. Voice tight. "I've got a lion cub. Alive. Injured. Hypothermic. Request immediate medical support at base camp. ETA 30 minutes. Tell Dr. Nyasha to prep the treatment bay." The reply crackled through a few seconds later. "Copy that. Daniel. Sending a team. Drive safe." He wrapped the cub tighter, started the engine, and tore off down the path. The Mbali Wildlife Rescue Station was small but well equipped. A long, low building nestled beneath acacia trees. It housed an infirmary, a veterinary lab, and holding enclosures for animals in rehabilitation. It was built for injured antelope, orphaned cheetahs, even the occasional elephant calf, but not often for lions. Tala was carried inside swiftly. The moment Daniel stepped through the door, 2 vet techs met him, helping him place the cub on a warm, padded table. Dr. Nyasha, the head veterinarian, was already pulling on gloves. "What happened?" she asked, eyes scanning Tala's body. "Flood zone," Daniel replied, brushing wet hair from his forehead. "Swept downstream. He survived. Somehow. Minor external injuries. Mild hypothermia. Serious exhaustion. Could be internal damage. And," he hesitated, "he was in the jaws of a crocodile." The team went still for a breath. "What?" Nyasha said, incredulous. He was being held, not crushed. And then, let go. He met her eyes. It was Ngulu. Another moment of stunned silence. Then Nyasha nodded once and turned to her team. "We'll process the story later. Let's save him first." The next few hours were a flurry of careful urgency. IV fluids were administered. A warming pad was placed under Tala's body. His vitals were logged. His breathing monitored. His temperature slowly brought up from dangerously low levels. The cub didn't fight. He flinched at touch but didn't resist. He was beyond fear, beyond aggression. Only when someone moved too quickly, or when a faucet hissed water into a nearby sink, would his muscles twitch. His eyes would shoot wide. Breath catch in his throat. He would shrink in on himself. Ears flattened. Tail tucked tight to his side. Daniel stayed nearby the entire time, watching through the glass, a quiet guardian on the other side of trauma. When the first night came, Tala was moved to a warm enclosure, a quiet room with straw bedding, heat lamps, and no sharp sounds. The staff dimmed the lights. No visitors. But Daniel was allowed to sit in the corner, still and calm, just watching. He stayed until past midnight. Days passed. Tala survived the first night. Then the second. He began drinking small amounts of warm milk from a shallow bowl. Then graduated to soft meat and vitamin supplements. His wounds, mostly bruises and scrapes, healed quickly under Dr. Nyasha's care. The lingering damage wasn't physical. It was in his flinching. Every time a pipe groaned, a hose sprayed, or even a water dish was moved too quickly, Tala would freeze, his pupils would dilate, and he would curl tightly into the corner of his pen, body trembling as if the flood was returning. More than once, he cried out, a tiny, broken yelp that made the staff go still. He remembers. Nyasha murmured one morning, watching him from the doorway. The water, the jaws. Of course he does. Daniel said softly. He was there long enough to feel it. Do you think he knows the croc didn't kill him? Daniel didn't answer for a long time. Then, I don't think he knows why he lived. Only that he was supposed to die. But slowly, Tala changed. He started walking more, stretching his legs, exploring his enclosure. He sniffed at enrichment toys, stuffed shapes filled with herbs and cloth, then batted at them. Cautiously at first, then with genuine curiosity. And he watched Daniel. Whenever Daniel came into the room, Tala would lift his head. His ears would perk slightly. He never approached. Not at first, but he didn't hide. He didn't curl up. Then came the morning Daniel crouched down and held out his hand. No sound, no motion, just his palm, resting open on the ground. Tala approached slowly, nose twitching. He sniffed the hand, then pressed his forehead, gently, briefly, against Daniel's fingers. It was enough. By the third week, Tala had gained weight. His eyes were brighter, his legs stronger. He started to run small laps around the enclosure, chasing shadows. The staff laughed the first time he skidded on a blanket and toppled over, scrambling back up with the dazed pride only a lion cub could manage. But the sound of rushing water still haunted him. During enclosure cleaning, the staff turned off all water sources. Hose flushing was done out of sight. But one afternoon, a visiting ranger accidentally opened the main valve near Tala's room. The sudden whoosh echoed down the corridor. Tala shrieked. He bolted into a corner, eyes wild, body coiled and shaking. It took Daniel half an hour to coax him out. Crouched low, speaking softly, letting the cub smell his coat, his skin, his voice. "It's not the river," he whispered. "It's not coming for you." Tala curled into his lap then, burying his face in Daniel's side. And Daniel held him, as one does with a survivor of something vast and cruel and beyond understanding. That night, Daniel sat outside the enclosure under the stars. He looked up at the sky, where the constellations glimmered over the savannah. "I don't know why he let you go," he murmured. "Maybe he saw something I didn't. Something worth saving." From inside the enclosure, Tala let out a soft, contented sigh, a small sound, but full of life, of hope, and for the first time in weeks, Daniel believed it was going to be all right. Months had passed since the flood. The plains of Mbali were dry again, blanketed in golden grass that whispered with every breeze. The river, once a churning monster, had returned to its usual steady pace, still powerful, but no longer wild. Life had settled back into rhythm. Herds grazed, birds nested, and the sounds of the bush resumed their familiar chorus. And within the walls of the wildlife station, Tala had grown, no longer a fragile, trembling cub. She had blossomed into a healthy, spirited young lioness. Her legs were strong, her shoulders muscular, her fur shone with health. And her eyes, those brilliant amber eyes, sparkled with life. But what set her apart wasn't just her recovery. It was her bond with Daniel. Every morning, she greeted him with a headbutt to the knee or a soft chuff of recognition. She followed him around the station, padding along just behind his boots like a shadow of fur and purpose. The staff laughed whenever she peeked her head through office doors or sprawled lazily near the radio tower, tail flicking with satisfaction. It was Daniel who gave her her name, Tala, meaning star in Swahili. She lived through the flood. He told the team one evening. She wasn't supposed to. She was lost in the dark, held by death itself. But she came through, a little light that didn't go out. The name stuck, and it suited her. Daniel spent more time with her than he'd ever expected to with a lion. She wasn't tame, none of them allowed themselves that fantasy, but she trusted him. Deeply, she responded to his voice, to his presence. When she was scared, she sought him out. When he worked late, she sat nearby. When he laughed, she tilted her head as if curious about the sound. Some nights, when the air was cool and the station quiet, he would sit outside her enclosure, and she would press against the fence, shoulder to his. She was growing into a queen. And yet, in moments like that, she was still the little cub who had once trembled in his arms. Then one morning, everything changed again. Ranger Amara came running toward the main building, out of breath, waving a GPS tablet. "Daniel," she shouted, "come see this." He jogged outside, meeting her near the southern lookout. "We were doing a perimeter patrol along the lower river path," Amara said, her voice shaking slightly. "I thought I saw something. Movement in the trees. So I checked the bank. Look." She turned the tablet to him. Daniel squinted at the satellite map. The screen displayed a narrow patch of savanna near the river's edge, just outside the reserve's deeper bush territory. At the edge of a clearing were unmistakable shapes, large paw prints. Multiple, some small, some adult-sized, lions. And not just passing through. The tracks overlapped, circled. They suggested resting, regrouping, a temporary den. Daniel felt his breath hitch. "They're back," he said. Amara nodded. "Or they never left." For a moment, he was speechless. The pride, the very one that had crossed the river the day of the flood, the one Tala had been swept away from. Everyone had assumed they'd been scattered, lost, or killed by the currents. No sightings had been confirmed in months. But here, finally, was proof. "They were here just 2 nights ago," Amara said. "We even found fur on a bush branch. Blood, too. Not a fight, Just injury. Daniel's pulse quickened. Any sign of specific individuals? Not yet. But there's more. She pulled up another photo, blurry, taken from a motion sensor camera that had reactivated post-flood. It showed a lioness limping through the brush, her flank marked with a deep gash. Behind her, two younger lions walked protectively close. Daniel stared at the lioness. His voice was barely a whisper. That could be Tala's mother. He didn't say it aloud. But he recognized the posture, the build, even the tilt of the ears, an echo of Tala in every step. They launched a drone the next morning. Daniel piloted it himself, fingers steady on the controls. The small quadcopter hummed above the trees, its camera scanning the brush. Hours passed with no movement. Just bush, shadows, silence. Then, motion. A flicker between trees. Daniel zoomed in. There they were. 6 lions resting beneath a low canopy, 2 juveniles, 3 adults, and the injured lioness. Her side was matted with dried blood. But she was alive, alert, licking the head of a nearby cub. Daniel's throat tightened. The lioness looked toward the drone's direction, her golden eyes piercing Tala's eyes. He returned to the station with the footage, and the staff crowded around to watch it. Tala's pride. Dr. Nyasha confirmed, nodding. The female matches the identification marks from old logs. That's her mother. Everyone went quiet. Tala lay in the corner of the office during the playback. As the footage showed the lioness limping across the screen, the young lioness's ears perked. She stood, took a few slow steps toward the monitor. Then stopped. She stared. No growl, no cry, just stillness. But her tail twitched with something powerful. Recognition. Daniel knelt beside her, resting a hand on her back. "We found them," he said quietly. "They're not gone." Tala didn't move, but she leaned into him. Gently. A decision loomed. Dr. Nyasha and Daniel met late into the night, weighing the options. Tala was nearly old enough to be bewildered. Her instinct was strong. Her hunting exercises successful, but her trauma ran deep. Her attachment to Daniel even deeper. Returning her to the wild now, especially into uncertain terrain, was risky. But to not try would be worse. "She deserves a chance," Daniel said, "not just to survive, to belong, with her kind. With her family." Nyasha studied him. "You think she's ready?" "I don't know, but I think she remembers." The next few days were preparation. A controlled release plan, tranquilizer protocols, veterinary monitoring. Daniel spent every free hour with Tala, walking, playing, training. When the day came, she stepped into the transport crate without struggle. Her eyes calm, as if she understood. Daniel rode with her in the truck as they approached the release zone near the Pride's last known location. Her body swayed with the motion, her breath steady. He looked at her through the mesh gate. "You're going to see her again," he said. "Your mother." Tala looked back at him, silent, but in her eyes, there was no fear, only something bright, like starlight, like memory, like home. The sun hung low over the savanna, casting long golden rays across the tall grasses. The air was dry, warm, and alive with sound, crickets, birds, the rustling of wind through acacia leaves. For weeks, Daniel and the team had been preparing for this day. And now it had come. Tala was going home. Not to the station, not to her enclosure or the soft safety of straw bedding and clean water bowls, but to the place she'd come from, where lions moved like shadows across the grasslands, where the air smelled of dust and freedom, and where the stars overhead told ancient stories her ancestors had lived. The transition had been gradual. They'd moved her to a semi-wild sector on the edge of Mbali Reserve. Carefully monitored but untamed enough to test her instincts. She learned to stalk again, to react to the movements of prey. She caught her first guinea fowl. She roared, not the soft chuff she used with Daniel, but a full, rising call that echoed across the veldt. Still, when Daniel arrived that morning to oversee her final release, she greeted him the same way she always did, shoulder pressed against the fence, head tilted toward him with an affectionate blink. As the sun climbed higher, the team opened the final gate. Beyond it, the wild stretched out, endless. Tala stepped forward and stopped. She turned, her eyes locked with Daniel's. And for a moment, he saw the cub again, the trembling little lion wrapped in his jacket. Barely breathing, the one who had clung to him in fear. The one who had learned to walk again, to trust again, to live. Now she was strong, whole, ready, but she hesitated. Daniel crouched near the gate, smiling gently. "You don't belong to a cage, Tala," he said softly. "You belong to the stars and the grass." She took a step toward him, pressed her forehead to the edge of the gate. He placed a hand on her head. Just for a moment, one last connection. "Go," he whispered. "You've come all this way. The rest is yours now." She turned, one paw, then another. The gate lay open, the horizon waiting. She stepped into it, at first slowly, like unsure ground beneath her, then faster, more confidently, until she was loping across the grass, golden fur gleaming in the light. Then came the sound, a rustle. From the brush ahead, a lioness emerged, older. Her gait slowed by a scar on her flank. Her body bore the marks of struggle and survival, but her eyes were fierce. She froze. Tala stopped too. The distance between them vanished as they stared. A beat, a breath, a memory. Then, as if drawn by something deeper than instinct, Tala stepped forward. So did the lioness. They met in the tall grass, two figures touching not with claws or tension, but gently. Tala lowered her head. The lioness leaned forward. They pressed foreheads. The moment held still. Time faded. The years, the pain, the floodwaters, the silence, it all fell away. Mother and daughter, found. Daniel watched from the ridge above. His heart caught in his throat. He didn't move, didn't speak. This moment didn't belong to him. It belonged to them. It belonged to the miracle that had unfolded not in some lab, not in a zoo, but here, in mud and water and teeth and hope. Eventually, the lions turned as one and disappeared into the brush, their bodies moving side by side, vanishing into the golden wild like a dream returning to the earth. Daniel stood for a long time, until the wind picked up and rustled the grasses in soft applause. Later, near dusk, he walked alone to the river. The same river. He sat down at the edge, where the bank still bore the scars of the flood, gnarled roots, driftwood bleached by sun and stones rubbed smooth by water's force. The current was calm now, peaceful. It shimmered with the reflection of the setting sun, as though remembering what it had done, and offering something back. He picked up a small flat stone and turned it over in his hands. It was warm from the sun, smooth, quiet. Daniel breathed deep. "This is where she almost died," he murmured, "and where she began." There had been a moment, so clear in his mind, when Tala had been caught between life and death, between river and croc, between darkness and light, and yet, she'd made it. Against every odd. Because of a croc that chose not to kill. Because of a ranger who chose to believe. Because sometimes, miracles don't crash like thunder, they arrive gently, clutching hope, drenched and shaking, quiet and fierce. He looked up at the sky. The stars were just beginning to show. And somewhere out there, a lioness moved across the plains. No longer a shadow of her past, but a light, burning steady, exactly where she was meant to be. Tala, the star that survived.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.